And like I said, make sure that we go out properly. Where is thing? Nope, it didn't update. Hold on. I'm going to stop this. Fantastic. All right, live here. Make sure that it worked over on the YouTube side. All right, we hit this button. Say, oh, we do this so that it looks a little bit better. We say, hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the beginning of the end. Fast and Furious X, the beginning of the trilogy that will end this series, apparently. But before we do that, Buddy, I want to tell the folks at home what it is we do on this Fast and Furious podcast.
On this Fast and Furious podcast, okay, we talk about all of the Fast and Furious movies. We don't talk about anything else. We don't waste our time with video games, okay, or like stupid Marvel movies. No, we only talk about family, okay. Oh my god. Okay, so I don't know. It's here. It happened. I'm freaking out about it. I feel like it is the momentousness of it really hit me last week, where I was just like, damn, this is huge. Like this is big. It's happening. And then I saw it and I was like, that was big. That happened. I will It's not my favorite. I don't think it's better than F9. F9 remains my sort of pinnacle, and some of the others, right? Like Fast 5, Fury 6. I feel like it's kind of like better than those, but it is better than what I would call sort of the worst entries in the franchise. Most notably, Fate of the Furious, right? Which I think is, in this modern era, it's the worst of those. And sort of like, so it strikes me as sort of this like middle of the pack. It is quite a lot of movie. There is just a lot that happens on screen. It goes a million different places. I think that sort of tears it a little at the seams. And I get that same sort of feeling I had in Fate of the Furious, where it sort of had the worst of what was happening in Fate of the Furious and Fast and Furious 6, where the team gets fractured and everyone's resolving these little plot cul-de-sacs. And there's these competing tones in some of those different sort of like plot threads. But a truly bonkers performance from Jason Momoa.
Oh, yeah.
Really saved it for me and kind of held the whole thing together. He was doing something else. He was doing something else. I don't even know. As well as some, I think that there's a lot of little stuff in here that I like a lot, right? Which kind of elevates it kind of above there. So, I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at it. Probably better than Furious, like right around where Furious 7 is in my mind, right? Better than Furious 7. Worse than 9, 5, and 6.
Interesting. I think I would agree with most of that. The only caveat I'd add is I'm going to reserve Final Judgment until we have the trilogy in front of us, right? This feels like a movie that could be retroactively made greater or lesser based on what comes in the future, right? Like this is a setup movie. It pretty clearly is a setup movie. There are obviously the victories and failures along the way and defeats along the way. Weirdly, it feels very, I don't want to spoil too much, so I won't say too much, but there's a movie I want to draw. I want to compare this to like the Fellowship of the Ring in a couple weird ways. Oh
my.
Yeah, just think about that while we head towards the spoiler section. But I would say, if you're a fan of the series, go watch this movie. I think I agree with Buddy that this is not the worst movie, but not the best either. But it will ultimately live or die by its follow-ups. But to what I said last week, which was basically that like this movie has to jump the shark harder, kind of. I think it has not failed on that yet. And I don't think, I think it has done the setup. I think it's done some stuff that is pretty wild that I think really follows in with that. And I think it kind of like is riding the line in the way that you wanted it, or it does the thing you described, where it's focused. This is about Dom and his family primarily, but they're still like making the external stakes pretty high, and I think that works. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it, I guess. But I think that's about all I'll say before we get to the spoiler section. Did you want to have anything else you wanted to talk about before we got to the spoiler warning?
No. I think that's a pretty good summation of sort of where I'm at, and I want to talk a lot about spoiler stuff, so let's just get into it.
Yeah, all right. So, spoiler warning for Fast and Furious. What is the formal title of this movie? Is it Fast X Furious?
Fast X, yeah, it's
Fast X. Spoiler warning for Fast X, also probably for every other film in this series. Because as a kind of end cap, there are lots of callbacks, so warnings all there. If you would like to see this movie before we talk about it, I would recommend going and seeing it and stopping this podcast and going and listening to it later. But that's your spoiler warning. So let's get into it. What do you want to talk about first?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think the best thing in this movie is Jason Momoa. Maybe I'll start there. Jason Momoa is doing this truly unhinged thing that is captivating and compelling and threatening. I was sort of actually, to be honest, I've had this weird, I feel like this is the opposite of what normally I feel like. Most of the time, I feel like I walk into a movie, I'm generally on board, and the movie sort of loses me over time, right? When I think about movies that I don't particularly like or I'm not particularly into, like maybe some of the recent Marvel movies would be like a good example of this. I'm kind of on board for maybe like the first hour, but things kind of just unravel at a certain point. I'm just like, okay, I'm out. Weirdly, Fast X kind of had the opposite, where I was sort of a little shaky in my foundation at first, and I wasn't sure what I wanted, like where it was going, kind of in the first, like, I don't know, it just hit me in the wrong way. It kind of had a bad first impression. But it ended up sort of building me back over time. And a lot of that is that I kind of didn't like Jason Momoa's introduction, like the way that he introduced himself, with this whole thing with, stealing Cypher's crew and all of that stuff. But I quite liked it when he showed up in action, right? And he's kind of doing this, like, weirdly, the Joker. He's like kind of doing the Joker thing, right? Of just like an absolutely unhinged madman who's doing shtick at the same time that he's like blowing people up, that kind of thing. And I don't know, that just like it really connected and is maybe the thing that holds this movie together for me the most, right? I maybe would probably like, if even Jason Momoa was medium good, right? Was just kind of fine, right? Like any other, like Shaw was sort of like this in Furious 7, right? He wasn't great, he wasn't terrible. He just kind of brought a certain level of flair to what was going on, and that was it, right? But because Jason Momoa was doing something that was compelling, it held things together more than I would otherwise have thought, right? And I probably would be complaining a lot more in this section of the podcast.
Fair. No, I think so. The term I have heard used, and I think it's appropriate, is Jason Momoa was chewing the scenery like no other.
Yes, absolutely.
I was a little wary because he was doing like, I didn't know how to feel about kind of like going between like the Joker shtick and like the kind of like deadly serious, you killed my father and you took my life from me and I will make you suffer, right? Like he like kind of like flips between the two, but I think ultimately it works. I at least think it's fun when he's chewing the scenery, so I'm willing to forgive it on that level, right? And it's just also like, as I've said, this is a Fast and Furious movie, right? It's not the end of the world to me if the character isn't the most artfully done and is more just kind of like is more about the raw emotion. So I get that. But yeah, I think I agree. I thought Jason Momoa was fun. And a movie that like these movies like have a level of fun to them that's kind of like absent in this one because it is mostly kind of like a downer setup movie. Um, and Jason Momoa brings a lot of that. I also like Roman has only ever gotten worse for me over the series, and he's the other general source of levity, right? Like, um, I just think that like their whole that trio's whole side plot or B plot was just like wholly uninteresting. Like you said, it's kind of plot cul-de-sac-y. All they
Oh, interesting. I'm sure.
um and like the stars of that part of the movie are like Han and Shaw, even though Shaw's in the movie for like a whole grand total of like 3 minutes. Whereas like Tej and Roman and what's the girl's name? Ramsey. They're kind of like vague kind of side characters, comic relief, and they feel kind of marginalized in their own kind of like plot line, which is like
yeah, I don't like the plot cul-de-sac, but I do like the characters and what they're doing, right? There's real moments, the first thing I thought of, I was like, I wish Justin Lin directed this because I feel like he would have nailed this in a way that really would have gotten to me, right? But there are real moments of sort of humanity to all of them, right? One where Roman expresses real regret at kind of getting everybody like pulled into this, and Tej is the one who's kind of like, actually, you're doing a really good job. A moment where Ramsey talks about how the technology that she created is what is being used to hunt them, and she hates that, right? And she feels this kind of level of responsibility for it. I really loved that. I just think that there was, I don't know, there was like a seriousness to their characters that like unwound some of the Flanderization, if that makes sense, that I appreciated quite a lot.
yeah,
But I do think the actual plot business of what they were doing was plot cul-de-sac, and I hated that.
I just don't know if I buy that like Roman like earned his kind of like redemption moment. It feels just kind of like, and when in a movie the character who is not taking responsibility takes responsibility, and this is a good character moment, TM, right? And it felt like that was kind of what was happening with Roman. I also just kind of like some of the stuff like the Pete Davidson cameo was literally just a Pete Davidson cameo, right? Like, because they're like, I know a guy. I'm like, oh, they're going to go to Shaw, and then they went to Pete Davidson to absolutely no end. And like there were like weirdly unfired Chekhov's guns, like they ate like psychedelic muffins, and like apparently all that happened was Han got swimming vision for like 15 seconds, and that was like the entire like fallout of that, right? Like like that. It felt like you just cut those minutes from the movie and it wouldn't have been a problem, right? Like that kind of thing. I did like I liked John Cena and Little Brian, Uncle Jacob and Little Brian. I thought those scenes were good. I'm sure you have this experience too of like driving down the 5 and like the miles of nothing, right? Like
yeah, they played a song I really love, The Far Side. You know who The Far Side are?
No.
There's like a whole underground hip hop movement that happens in the 90s or whatever, but the song when they pull into the gas station is a song that's on like a lot of my like playlists or whatever. It's called Passing Me By. It's very famous. That band, I think The Far Side is from Oakland.
That makes
but
sense.
they now I want to like look this up because I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think The Far Side is from Oakland, and then they went to South Central Los Angeles and kind of became this like underground sensation. They're the kind of like when at the same time like Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre are blowing up in the 90s. The Far Side. No, they are actually just from Los Angeles. Okay. But it was a very LA moment, which felt true to the series in a way that was like good, right? Especially because he's talking about this wistful car from the 90s that he really loves or whatever. And he has like a little tape deck. Like all of that that really worked for me.
Excellent. Yeah. No, that made sense to I get that. And I just thought it was fun, right? Like the kind of like John Cena and a kid going on an adventure. I was actually I feel like the moment where he like goes to the truck and it's not his truck, right? I initially thought this was gonna be like, oh, and this is where Hobbs shows up because Uncle Jacob and and other Uncle The Rock, right? Like Uncle Hobbs are going to like have a muscle man competition, but that didn't happen sadly. In fact, I think it kind of turned into a dig at the muscle car, at the Rock muscle car thing, right? Like this feels like this was shot before they got The Rock to agree to be in the movie. But I thought it was still I really enjoyed it. I was kind of sad to see John Cena or to see Uncle Jacob die, but I also don't know if I believe that that's real.
I also don't know that I believe that that's real. But we'll see. I guess there's a part of me that thinks that it is real, just because
it could be.
The movie is so overstuffed, right? But it also felt like I don't know. It is either a bait and switch or the moment doesn't really land, depending on whether or not that it's real. Because even at the time, I was like, wait, is he really dead, or is that like, I don't know. It was just like that. There was some stuff there that was kind of confusing. I in general liked the ending of the movie, and the ending actually kind of saved that uncle, nephew plot line. There was a while where I was getting the whiplash that I was getting in Furious 8 or Fate of the Furious, with The Rock's stuff doing shtick versus Vin Diesel's stuff where he's doing, super sincere stuff. But the kind of plot twist at the end of the movie that actually what Dante has been after this whole time is the kid, right? Because he wants to kill Dom's kid in front of him, basically. That would like help to sell it all together, right? Because the setup is so wistful, it kind of makes the stakes higher, because you get this reversal of, oh, now shit is going down, right? And during the climax of the movie, like, not only is shit going down there, but it's going down everywhere, right? The plane carrying the other people is shot down. There's this stuff with Ames, which I really loved. There's this stuff with Ames where he's actually been working with Dante the whole time. Letty's out of the picture. Hobbs is out of the picture. It is truly just Dom and Brian alone on this dam facing off against Dante, who has lived up to the hype, essentially, of being this mastermind villain who has like pulled off this crazy this like whole crazy thing, right? That's where it all kind of came together for me. I think I would probably be complaining about that plotline if it was executed in a different way. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's parts of this too where like I'm actively not going to think about it because there's no point. It's a Fast and Furious movie.
Sure.
Where like I am sure that if I like went through this, I could be like some of Ames's actions don't make sense in the scheme of this. Like that, I don't know that because, like I said, I'm actively not thinking about this, right? Unless you're like these twists tend to not work when you can pick them apart, but because it's a movie where I don't care about picking it apart, it'll work for me, right? Like,
ironically, I actually do think. I mean, I don't know. I also haven't spent a lot of time in it, but something that did hit me in a weird way. I was like, why the fuck? Like, I remember thinking this. I was like, why is the agency going after a kid, right? Like this little kid, because there's this whole fight scene with Mia and Jacob at the house, at the Fast and Furious house. And I appreciated that it answered that question, right? Which is that, oh, Ames has actually been evil this whole time. And when Jacob was able to get Brian away from them, that was good, right? That was like a good moment for the team, and it was a bad moment for Ames, and they had to improvise and come up with a new plan. That felt like that felt good. I guess I haven't thought about any of the other details. But I don't know. The execution of the twist villain worked for me. Is I guess really the
as an emotional beat, it worked. I think what detracts from it is like I could believe that Uncle Jacob's dead. I do not believe that Roman, Tej, and Ramsey are dead.
Sure. The moment of them going down in the plane was important because it was this like everything is falling down around you. I don't think it was good in the sense of like I'm killing all of you. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't sell to me. But I also think that it shouldn't, right? In the same way that like with BVS, for instance, you know that Superman is coming back or whatever. It's okay for the story to sort of include death as a way to, you know, communicate things to characters rather than to try and hit you with the impact of somebody dying. And it's the same sort of thing, right? I also don't believe that Roman, Tej, Han, and Shaw are all dead because that would be awful.
Han or Shaw isn't on the plane. He's going to save his mom.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. You're right. Okay.
But yeah, no, like the thing that like I don't know. Again, it doesn't really bother me, but the thing I would point out is like they basically have a lot of leeway to like decide which aspects of this thing that is happening is intentional or not, right? Like you could like, as long as they don't make a claim that everything they did was on purpose, then you can be like, oh, they had to, like you said, they had to improvise here, right? Because they screwed up, right? But yeah, no, I agree that the twist is well done. I could also like, just to go back to the Jacob thing for a second, like I could see a point in the second or third movie where like one of the ways that like Jason Momoa like puts the like, you know, gets leverage against Dom again is like he's got Jacob and he's like, you know, hurt, but you know he's been captured by what's Jason Momoa's character's name again?
Dante.
Great right name. Yes, Dante. Yes.
What a perfect villain name.
Yeah, is that he's been captured by Dante. But you know, that's I could believe even like I could see it go either way, and I think Jacob's death is credible enough to hit in the right way. I think John Cena hit the right kind of emotional cadence, right? Like the very sincere, cool uncle is kind of the vibes I was getting from him, and I think that works with the plot better than, you know, like Hobbs' shtick, right? Like as we've talked about before. So I liked Uncle Jacob's character in the movie. And he also brings kind of like a different flavor, right? Like he's like the spy man rather than like the Cars, you know, like the purely Cars guy.
Yeah, I will say that is part of my disappointment with the movie. Really outside of the first big chase in Rome, which I did like a lot. Like I said, this is the kind of the where the movie picked me up, right? The first however many minutes I was off, and then Rome happened and I was like, okay, cool, we're back sort of in it. There's really just sort of two car things that happen, right? There's Rome, there's a little bit in Brazil, and then there's the final chase, kind of the whole thing in Portugal. Rome was sweet. Rome was cool, though I didn't love everything about it. And I didn't super like the end. I felt like it mostly felt like not confident is probably the way that I would put it. It felt like the thing that the director really wanted to do was hand-to-hand fight stuff, right? The traditional kind of action movie stuff, which makes sense. You know, he has this traditional action movie sort of bona fides. That's fine or whatever. But that is one of the things that has always been a headliner for me about the Fast and Furious movies is they are car people doing car things, and that's what's cool about them, right? And there's a lot to love of that, especially in F9, right? You know, they have the whole thing with the Beast, you know, that's real, it's all practical. I always gush about the stuff that they're doing that's practical. You know, Fast X just didn't have a lot of that, and so it felt the most. You know what? Actually, I can't believe I'm gonna make this reference. It sort of didn't feel like a Fast and Furious movie in the same way that you talk about The Last Jedi not being a Star Wars movie, right? Like this is an action movie set in the Fast and Furious universe with Fast and Furious characters, but it is not a Fast and Furious movie, right? Because, you know, one of the things this series focuses on, you know, are the cars, are the stunts. And that focus wasn't there for this one. There's some stuff that I did like all things considered. When it came to that, like, I think it's cool the thing that Dom did with the 2 helicopters. Sure. Um, I think chasing the mine, this runaway mine going through Rome was also cool, even though I kind of thought the end of that whole chase scene was pretty dumb. But like at the end of the day, there's just not as much here as I want in one of these films, and uh, what are you gonna do? You know?
Yeah, no, I get it. I tentatively agree. Um, yeah, I'll give you a solid.
I will say that by the way, on the flip side of this is that I do think the action itself was pretty good. For instance, the fight scene with John Cena and Mia in the Fast and Furious house was pretty great.
Yeah,
Is maybe the best action outside of Hobbs and Shaw, which I do think is still the best action. Just in terms of like, like fights or whatever like that. Mostly because there's a real eye for geography that I really appreciated. Normally, sort of what happens in these movies. By the way, this also kind of appeals to the driving as well. But normally, what sort of happens in these movies is you get a lot of you're kind of in the eye of the action and you're just sort of following it, but you're not really keeping track of where the action is, and people are appearing and kind of falling away in random sorts of ways, right? So like in Furious 7, they're fighting in Los Angeles, but I don't have a sense of the geography of Los Angeles, the geography of that fight, right? With Rome, there's very clear geography, right? There's this clear thing kind of swooping down into the Vatican, and St. Peter's Square, I think is what they're aiming for or whatever. And it really helps you understand what's happening. Oh, this mine is rolling downhill towards this thing, right? And the crew need to stop that from happening, and you're kind of watching that play out in a macro sort of sense, which is pretty different. Or stuff like Mia gets one of the guys to shoot a gun at the ceiling in the house, and then John Cena throws the guy down into the floor, and it's where that ceiling happens, and so he falls through the ceiling. Like that stuff. I think all of that stuff works pretty well and is worthy of compliments, I guess.
I agree. No, I absolutely agree. I thought that, like, I agree with you. I thought that scene was good. I guess I get what you're saying about the car stuff. I remember I was a little ticked off that kind of like the traditional race was like cut off by like the like, I think it works as a character moment that like Jason Momoa ruins the race by like bombing the other 2 of the cars, right? But it also kind of like just like, oh, they cut out the race part of the car movie, right? Because or they kind of like cut it short. But I get it, right? Like that is the way you do like the way you kind of like subvert expectations, right? Like, I know that phrase can be a little bit loaded, especially given the comparisons to The Last Jedi. But like, the expectation is just like, he is going to do a race, and it's going to, he's going to win the race, and it's going to be good, right? Like, and, he's going to get some minor victory that way. And Jason Momoa just refuses to play by the rules and like fucks everything up. And I think that works from a tonal point. But that's why I think that, we need the other 2 movies to kind of like make the whole thing make sense, right? Like we need the whole vision of what this looks like, because it could fall on its ass, or it could land it, and I'm obviously hoping that it lands it.
Yeah, the thing about the race that frustrated me is we've seen actually that you can do races that are suspenseful in these films, right? There are races in other ones. There are races in this era, right? In Furious 6, there's a street race with Dom and Letty, and it's like Dom and that's a character moment. It's Dom and Letty flirting or whatever, but the race itself is still like interesting and fun. There's the race in 2 that I like a lot, Too Fast, Too Furious, where you were actually getting the strategy where Brian and Roman are doing the tag team race against the other 2 guys, and Brian wins that race because he makes this bold choice to play the game of chicken, and like it's like the movies figured out very quickly that just having 2 cars going in a straight line is really boring, right? And it's not a fun way to do racing scenes, right? So as much as I guess I appreciated the throwback, because there were a couple of them that made me think it was intentional, right? The most notable of which was the CGI zoom in
The engine.
to the engine, which was back, which frankly blew my mind in a just. I feel like I could do a whole podcast on just that as like a moment because it is sort of brain breaking that moment. But you know, that stuff aside, um the it was weird to kind of go back to this thing with the race and just have it be the most boring way to stage a race possible.
Well, it's because it's not actually they're not actually doing the race, right? They're like
Yeah.
the thing that always happens.
But I mean, you can do a thing where you plant mines on these characters as they're doing a real race through Rio, right? You know, like doing a real street race through Rio with twists and turns and not this like, you know, quarter mile drag strip thing.
Okay, no, I see what you're saying. I think it being short is what sells that like Dom couldn't do anything about it, right? Like, you know, like
Yeah.
like again, whenever one of these races happens, like Dom like I think like the kind of thesis of Dante, right, is like, you know, Dom wins at car things, and so Dante is hitting at him by not doing car things, right? And as much as like and you know, and Dante has absolutely no honor, whereas like everybody like any previous villains that like face Dom on the track, right, have honor, right, at some level, right? Like anybody
Yeah.
who he's raced against, like, you know, are at least willing to acknowledge the fact that Dom beat them fair and square. Like, I think this is actually a thing that I think works. Is like, not only does Jason Momoa cheat, he has the temerity to then say that like he beat Dom in a street race, right? Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
This is part of the stuff that makes it so good, right? And he says it to Brian. He says, "You know, I beat your dad at a street race."
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah.
like, you know, it's, and I think it works on an emotion level, even if you're, I think you're right. Like, it's not the. I think it wouldn't. I think if the overall movie was a little bit stronger, it wouldn't stick out as much as kind of like a sore point. But I think it is the right execution of that particular moment.
Okay. You know what? Sure. I do like that moment, to be fair,
Yeah.
because it is a reversal, or it is both a callback and a reversal of the traditional thing.
Yeah.
The thing that Dom did was he went to a street race when I think it was Hobbs who was after him, right? And Hobbs shows up, and Dom does this thing where he says, you know, like, this is Brazil, and all the people draw their guns at Hobbs and his crew in order to get them to back off or whatever. And having an echo of that happen where, you know, Dante says that mockingly to Dom was really great. And I liked all of that sort of like interaction. I also just like there's something about this like weird Jason Momoa aesthetic that is my favorite thing. Like what the fuck was he doing with his hair there? I don't know, but he's just wild, and
Yeah.
it's like letting your 5-year-old dress himself or something. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are you doing? But it's also innately compelling in a way that I couldn't possibly, you know, explain.
Yeah. I mean, and you get a sense that he's like actually like out of his gourd, right? Because like the scene with like where he's like doing mimosas with the two dead tech guys, right? Like,
I loved that.
yeah, but like if like that's not for anybody, right? Like it's not like this is an act he's putting on to like freak somebody out. Like that is just him, right, in that scene. Like the camera is not a person, right? Like there's nobody else alive in the scene. It's just him being fucking out of his gourd.
Yeah. Apparently they almost cut that scene, which would have been a huge mistake. I'm glad they kept it. And also apparently I did a little bit of research because I wanted to see if I could figure some stuff out. And also a lot of what Jason Momoa was doing was improvised because he was trying to make Vin Diesel break in the scenes. He was trying to like
Get him
he
to
was
laugh.
like, yeah, like things like calling him a butthole, which I also really loved. Like that was improv, right? So there's apparently just like a lot of that where he was trying to get Vin Diesel to break into, and apparently he never did, which is kind of funny
Yeah.
in just like a meta sense. Like, because I keep talking about how fucking seriously Vin Diesel takes these stupid fucking car movies. That extends even outside of, like the realm or whatever. But like, I don't know. All of that stuff I think worked well. I liked the backstory that kind of got uncovered there. I liked that Elena had this sort of sister, though I was depressed that she didn't join the crew for about a second before, she kind of became this MacGuffin, right?
Yeah.
Um, there's that whole shootout thing that happens on the bridge. The bridge I also was a little depressed by because I was hoping for that to be like a more real sort of action, a more real car scene. It was basically just like a normal action scene, right? But that was cool stuff, right? Like Dom flipping the car in order to shoot the guy with it was pretty great. I don't know. There's just like there's a lot to love in
Yeah.
this movie.
I want to say that something I really liked was like the way Jason Momoa and Ames dressed in the past, like that kind of like that era or like that kind of like style, like the suits with like the V-neck thing, right? Like that was super fun. That's like a thing that I would like want to cosplay at some point and have nobody understand what I'm doing.
I loved it. The Ames's look was great. Because he has those whatever they are. It's like the straps of like a gun holster. I don't actually think he had a holster, but it's like a whatever.
I
Like
think
a
there was
shoulder.
were they just suspenders?
Were they? I
They
don't
might
know.
have been.
Whatever that looks. That's a great look. I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of that look.
Yeah. What else? So before we get to one of the things I want to talk about, I do want to like, I was not a huge fan of like the Letty Cypher. Like once they get like
The worst one.
yeah, like once they get out of the beds, like that fight scene just felt contrived. Like, and she was like, we have like 4 minutes, and then like she climbs up the shaft and has enough time to come back down, and like there's still nothing there, right? Like that. It feels like that storyline was like jumbled and dropped on the ground and nonsensical, and I didn't particularly like it.
I feel like that storyline has something to do with like maybe Michelle Rodriguez like filming another movie or something.
Oh, this is maybe like the female led, like this is maybe like a cutscene from the female led Fast project or something.
Oh, I actually didn't think about that, but maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That was the worst thing, right? That was the most plot cul-de-sac-y. It went literally nowhere, right? The only thing that really happened was the very, very final reveal, which is when the sub comes up and Giselle is
Told you we didn't see her die. Oh, also, I knew it was going to happen the moment Dom said to Han that fatherhood is like the best thing in the world, right? Because like Han's whole thing is he's sad that Giselle's dead, right? Like they're gonna have babies by the end of this trilogy.
Where are they gonna get back together? I don't know.
Neither of them are like Han is not dead.
No, I understand, but like, how if you're Han, right? You are so depressed that you go to Tokyo or whatever, right? Like how the whole thing is that they love each other, right? She literally died for him, right? But she didn't actually die. There's got to be a better answer to this.
Well, I mean, they're going to have kids by the end. Like, I don't care if it doesn't make sense on an intellectual level, right? Like, that is what is going to happen, right? Like, or they're going to like she's going like they're going to like she's going to be pregnant in like the end scene or something, right? Like, because like the moment he mentioned it, I thought there was maybe a chance that Han finds somebody else to like love, right? Like he gets over Giselle, right? But that's like now that Giselle's back, that's not going to happen, right? They're going to get their happily ever after because like they were the best couple in the series or something, right? Like
I don't know. I loved Han. By the way, I do want to say I loved Han in this. In beautiful Han action, and he had great stuff. I loved the drugs thing. I know the drugs thing was dumb. I know it was, okay. But Han's thing is the snacks. He eats snacks. He's constantly eating these fucking snacks. And so the thing that he accidentally gets this like shitty muffin or whatever and starts tripping That was just it was funny. It was just funny, and I really loved it. And I loved his fight scene with Shaw. Right, the stuff
I
with
agree.
Shaw was interesting because like I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel about it. Right, like the retcon to Han being alive is so not dwelled upon that you don't even know, is Shaw in on it? Is Shaw did try and kill him?
No, he absolutely. That's why they get into a fight, right? Like Shaw, like this is supposed to, I think, be a moment of badassery for Shaw, right? Like this is like the equivalent of like Han showing up, seeing Darth Vader, and just shooting, right? Um, this is like Han shows up and he's not like, "How are you alive?" He's like, "If you're alive, that means you're here for revenge," and they just start fighting, right? Like,
So yes, I'm on board with that, right? It's just like I don't know. There's just something about that I like. I didn't have the proper context to really root me in it or whatever. But I generally really like the action scene. This is another one where the geography is really good, right? Because
yeah,
you have the alley, you have the door into this thing, and then you have Shaw's garage. Um, and and that was all set up in such a way that you really knew where all of the fighting was taking place, and you could cut from inside the building to outside the building, and it made a lot of sense, which I really like. This is the stuff that I think was best about the action. And and I also just like the way that they fought together. I don't know. I feel like maybe it's just that I like Jason Statham as an action star.
yeah.
I
No, he's
think
good at it.
maybe, he is like, he's he has this Jackie Chan I do my own stunts thing, which maybe makes it like work better than some of the other people doing stuff. I don't know, but that's maybe my favorite of the action scenes. And I loved, this is the final detail that I loved, and I'm mad we didn't get a thing for it. Okay. God, I'm so mad we didn't get a thing for it. I loved that he had a replica of his brother's car from Fast and Furious 6. That is the biggest Chekhov's fucking gun that did not go off, that pissed me off so bad. I was so sure. I have been talking about this stupid ramp car
Yeah,
every episode since Fast 6 because I think it's so fucking cool. And I was so ready for it to show up. And I was like, when they were doing the thing on the Portugal, I was like, 100% it's happening, because they're being trailed by all of these cars. They set up this unending mercenary army, and it's like, oh, this is perfect. You have now established that there are a gazillion fucking cars that you can just ramp flip over and over and over again, and it's going to be so fucking cool, right? And they just didn't do it.
yeah.
I have hope. The ramp car is in the plane with them that got shut down. So I have hope that the ramp car will show up in Furious 11, Fast 11,
No,
whatever
it's
it's going to be.
it's 10-2, right? We're in Final Fantasy numbering terms now.
Yeah. The thing I think of that they might actually do, well, I don't know. We could talk about some of the speculation stuff. I don't know. I guess we could talk about it now. What else do you want to talk about?
Just some quick hits, right? Like
Sure.
on the Giselle thing, right? Beyond I called it. The other thing that appeared that I thought about was do you like the thing that crossed my mind is like she obviously was filmed separately from everybody else. I'm like, did she like do that and the Shazam appearance in the same day? And what were there any other quick hits? I'm going to take a half point on Paul Walker coming back because they did the blurry thing for like half a second in the beginning when in the past, right? And then they also reused previous footage, right? Like, I think I'm going to take a half point of that, and I think we might get a full appearance at some point. I'm less confident in that now just because they did do something with him, right? We did not get the Transformer moment. In either way. What else? I will. Yeah. No. I guess the only other thing is I think they did the Hobbs moment pretty well for like what I'm pretty like I'm confident now is kind of like after they shot the movie, they got The Rock on board and they did a post credit scene. But I think that was the right way to do the post credit scene for for Hobbs, right? Like have him show up and then have him drop a one liner, right? Like
Yeah, his specific one-liner, he calls him a some bitch because he does that all the time in these movies. I absolutely love that. My hope, by the way, this is part of my speculation. My hope is that Fast 11 is actually less about Dom and more about Hobbs. I kind of think you could make a really compelling movie out of kind of the B team in a way, right? What you could do is you could sort of the stuff with Dom ends on this cliffhanger, right? But there's all these like kind of loose ends. But I really like the idea that Dom is not in 11 all that much. That a lot of what is happening in 11 is Hobbs driven, and that can include stuff from Hobbs and Shaw. This is my big called shot. I think they are going to make references to Hobbs and Shaw in 11.
Oh, I think you're right. I think at some point that loose end is going to get wrapped up. Like because they like hint that like there's more there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Dante is pretty perfect to tie into all of that stuff, because the thing at the biotech firm was like a guy from Hobbs's past, right? So that's kind of my call to out with this stuff. But I actually think that it would really serve the movie well if sort of the main character of 11 is Hobbs and the conceit is rescuing Dom, right? Figuring out maybe what happened to Dom, right? Like the idea that the crew all think maybe he's dead. Maybe Dante did it. He blew up the dam, right? But Hobbs is the one who is simultaneously being pursued by Dante. Dante's coming after him, right? But he's also trying to track down the clues of like maybe Dom didn't actually die on that dam and they were able to get out alive, which obviously we do know that they were able to get out alive, right? The big thing is, they drove off the dam or whatever. But I think that would be
we don't know that he's gotten out alive, right? Like that's the cliffhanger, true. Right? Like so I'm going to call my shot. I'm going to be a little bit more specific. I think the opening of the movie is everybody's going to presume that Dom and Brian are dead, right? And the movie is going to be the crew, maybe not including, whatever members are relevant, right? Like them going after Dante because he's chasing them all, and them trying to get justice for Dom, right? I think that like by the end of the movie, everybody's gonna be reunited, right? Dom and Brian are gonna turn out to have been okay somehow, right? Like maybe Mr. Nobody saves them or something. That's when he comes, because he's coming back at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is my other cult shot. I think 11 is going to be about Ames. I think that is going to be about defeating Ames. There's going to be stuff because I think Ames is related to Hobbs. And like if I'm thinking about what 11 is going to look like, 11 is going to look like Ames versus Hobbs in a way.
Okay.
And then it's going to get the whole crew together, and then they're all going to kind of like face down Dante in the final one. If they are doing this trilogy thing, which we don't know, I think they are, but we don't know. And so that's my called shot, is that 11 will focus on Hobbs. I think Dom is going to be out of the movie. I actually think it's going to do the thing where you have dramatic irony, where one side of the team thinks that he's dead, but but you are also going to be following Dom and Brian as they are, hiding, as they are on the run. Like I don't think they're going to write Vin Diesel out of these movies. No, obviously he's got to be there, right?
I agree.
But yeah.
So I've got a couple more specific parts of this. I think Dom and Brian meet up with Mr. Nobody. That's a little bit, I'm less confident about this, but something I think that's going to turn out to be the case. And this is wild speculation, but I'm like fairly confident in it just because I think that's like the way these story beats go. Dante should have lost all of his money in that thing, right? Like turns out, I think it's going to turn out that like the organization that's the villain in Hobbs and Shaw is going to be the people that have been funding Dante as kind of like a guided missile at Dom, right? Yep. And Ames is going to be a member of that organization, right? He's going to be
that was exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's gonna. I think that's gonna be like the thing, like Dante, like, you know, the organization is kind of the big bad behind Dante, right? Like, um, and you know, I could see maybe no, I would say like maybe we could get like a last minute like Dante heel face turn, just kind of like a turns out like the organization is responsible for something related to his father's death or something. But that's more just kind of like me like doing kind of like trope casting rather than like having a basis in the plot. But yeah. The other thing I wanted to bring up that I keep forgetting about because I think she was forgettable. I thought Brie Larson's acting wasn't great, and I don't think her role was particularly impactful. And her whole thing seemed to be she had spiky shoes. So not a big fan. I don't like. I also didn't like Captain Marvel that much, but I don't have particular animus against Brie Larson like some people seem to. But I just don't think she was great here.
Yeah, I agree, especially because she was tied into this stuff with Letty, which I thought was all bad.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like
Yeah.
maybe you could have sold me on this in a version of things where I don't know. She was doing better stuff than kind of getting lost in the sauce with Letty and Cypher, but you know, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, you know what? I think maybe like the like I didn't think of this until you mentioned it, but it would not surprise me if all of that was like the no longer existent female Fast X movie, right? Female led Fast or not Fast X, Fast and Furious movie, right?
Yeah, like for instance, I liked her in the Brazil stuff because she has God's eye, right? She has the thing, which is an important MacGuffin, right? Because it is you. This is when you find out that what Dante is really after is he's really after Brian, and the whole thing is a setup in order to get God's eye into Dante's hands. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty clever, especially because you later learn that Ames, you know, it makes more sense in retrospect that this whole thing was a setup because Ames is working on the inside and is the person who helps shepherd these things into the place where, you know, like where they go or whatever. But, you know, so that sort of speaks to her potential, but she doesn't actually do much there, right? You know, and so this is sort of why I think that she sort of doesn't get anywhere. I would be okay. There's been a couple of these people who have shown up, and I would just, like, to me, pitch him, write him out of the movie. They showed Little Nobody again, for instance. I was like, I don't need this, and then I guess he's like hospitalized or something. I don't know. I don't feel like I need any of this. Get rid of it. These would be my recommendations.
I think so. I think Little Nobody and Ms. Nobody are redundant, right? Like, like I am like, the more I talk about this, the more sure I am that like she was supposed to be like because the female led movie was supposed to be female led, she was supposed to be the nobody standing in that movie, right? But I think that her and Little Nobody are going to be the people that like, you know, wrest control of the agency back from Ames and whatnot, right? Like that's going to be a point, right? Like, but that is going to be accompanied by like Kurt Russell showing up again, right? Like, because that's like he's definitely coming back, right? Like, you know, all the Warriors, everybody's going back, everything is coming back. I was joking on Twitter earlier. I said, you know, Dom's going to fix a tank with a Coke can tab, and that's facetious. But I do think there's going to be some piece of large military hardware that gets used, right? Like at some point in the next two movies, right? Like I think every kind of like big major like that's like I think you're right that since the flipper car was on the plane, it's going to make an appearance. But it also could have just been like it's in the shot because it was in one of the movies. It needs to be in the movie again, right? Like the Tokyo Drift crew is going to come back at some point, right? Like I just think that's got to happen, right? Like, there's no way.
I think the Tokyo Drift crew is going to come back. I feel like maybe they just leave. You know, they were in F9. That's good enough.
So I think the story doesn't demand it, but I think that what this project is demands it, right?
Okay.
Like,
you know, sure, fair enough.
Like. They're the people like, you know, they will be some minor but important role, right? Like they're the people that like, you know, help Dom and Brian when they're separated from everybody else or something, right? Like that or like maybe we do another one of these split things, right? Like Tej, Letty, or not Tej, Letty, Tej, Roman and Ramsey and Han. Actually, I think that's actually going to be it. Tej, Han and Roman and Ramsey all end up going to Tokyo and dealing with them, right? Like Tej and Roman have a relationship with them now because they're the ones that flew them into space in Fast 9. And Han obviously has history with them. Like when they're still on the run in the second movie, I imagine that's where they're going to end up. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just don't think, I don't think Vin Diesel lets anybody, unless, the actors are like, I want no part of this. I think he's going to do every single callback possible. Even though they were in Fast 9, I think it's unavoidable. Especially, I know that, it has, the Tokyo Drift stuff is just kind of, a weird part of, the old style stuff, but, I think Tokyo Drift has enough cult status to kind of, make that want to be a part of it, right? I don't think I'm the only person
Did they play the Tokyo Drift song when they introduced them?
I don't think so.
I feel like if they do go back to Tokyo and do Tokyo Drift stuff, they're going to play this song.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, I don't think I'm the only person, and, I know friend of the cast, Akshay, Tokyo Drift is his favorite, but, I don't think the two of us are the only people that really like Tokyo Drift. I think it's got, its own...
No, I mean, I also really like Tokyo Drift, so I'm on board with you 100% of the way. Yeah, okay. All right, interesting.
Yeah. So, that's 55-ish minutes. Do you want to talk about anything else?
I'm honestly a little surprised you liked it this much. It's funny because we have done some podcasts where I say I liked a movie and then we just spend an hour shitting on it. And I feel like I liked this movie about as much as I liked those movies, but we actually spent about an hour talking about the stuff that was pretty good,
Yeah, I think part of this is not only did you get me bought in, but it's also bought in the way where I'm willing to turn my brain off for the movie, right?
Yeah, that is, yeah.
I'm willing to appreciate this movie for what it is, which is a big, dumb, stupid action movie, which I'm happy to enjoy on its merits.
It has big, you know what, honestly, it has big, himbo energy,
yeah,
because it's dumb in a very endearing way. It's not dumb in a cloying or annoying or frustrating way. It's dumb in a way that's just oh my god, you're so cute. Fast and Furious, come on, right?
Right, if this movie had a bunch of bathos in it, right, I'd hate it, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Right,
yeah.
And I think Jason Momoa, I think skated a little close to it. There was a point early in the movie where I thought he might have been doing a bathos thing, but it turns out the character's just crazy, and I think that, that's what saves it. There is a version of this where, one of the characters, kind of, half turns to the camera. I think Roman got too close to this when he was it's like we're superheroes, right? We're invincible in Fast 9. That was the closest the movies got to pointing a finger at the audience and being you're stupid for enjoying this, which is kind of the worst version of the bathos thing, right?
Yeah. And I will say the flip side of this is that it also takes a lot of itself seriously in ways. So I'm reminded of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, right? Something I complained a lot about in that movie was how it made you feel stupid for caring, right? If you think that it's cool that Doctor Strange is going to fight Baron Mordo in the sequel, that movie is making fun of you, right? And there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I think it's actually true in a lot of Marvel, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, right? Which is why it is neat in this movie that anytime that there's a moment of we're tying this back to a previous moment in the franchise, that stuff is taken very seriously and is not, undercut in the way that, I don't know, undercut's a pretty good word for it, I guess, which feels good, right? I care about these movies. I know the lore of these movies, right? And it does not throw that in my face as a way to, score a cheap joke, right? You don't have a moment where someone makes fun of Dom for saying the street always wins, right? Because that moment is cool in the world of these movies. And it thinks that moment is cool and is not going to, shit on you for thinking that moment is cool. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, it does this in the right way, which is Dante shits on Dom, not because Dom is wrong, but because it's a way that that Dante can get an advantage over Dom, right?
Yeah.
Like Dom's precious family is a weakness, not a thing to be like. It's a thing to be mocked in a villainous way, right? Like, you know, the villain mocks the family, right? Not because it's dumb, but because that's what villains do, right? As opposed to like you said, like, you know, with some of this with the multiverse of madness, like, you know, you might have, or like with the Marvel movie, you might have one of the heroes doing it, which is like the wrong way to do it, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, 100%. I think I agree with you. Not my favorite of these movies, but I also am willing to give it a lot of leeway, right? Like, if this movie crashes and burns on the third movie, I will absolutely tear it down. But I don't think we're there, so you know.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
How was your week? How's life? How's it going?
That's good. I played a lot of Breath of the Wild. It's a
Wait,
real
Breath
good.
of the Wild?
Tears of
Or
the Kingdom.
Tears of the Kingdom?
Tears of the
Okay.
Kingdom. Thank you. Breath of the Wild didn't grab me. Tears of the Kingdom has enough of the sauce that it did. I there are very few games that like grab me like this. And there are some. It's not a perfect game, but like it kind of hits me in a lot of, not in the kind of like immersive way that Skyrim does, but in kind of like the, oh, just one more thing that Skyrim does, right? Like it was like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then I'll go back to town and I'll be done. It's like, oh, but there's a cave right over there, so I'm going to go check that out, and then I'll go back to town, and then I'll be done. Oh, but there's another thing over here, and then I'll go back to town, and then I'll be done, right? Like, that has happened to me many, many times in Breath of the Wild or in Tears of the Kingdom. Just kind of like the stuff that's scattered around, the ability to like kind of like do little bits of things and like feel satisfied, but like, you know, always wanting to do like one more quick little thing. I think it's great. And I would highly recommend it to anybody out there. Super high marks for me. Not enough to dethrone Odyssey as my favorite game on the Switch, but absolutely 2 thumbs up from me. But yeah, that has been the vast majority of my gaming time this week. Yeah. Yeah. What about you? What have you been up to?
The big thing for me is Hearthstone. I played a bunch of Hearthstone this weekend because I wanted to hit Legend. I found a deck that is really compelling. It's a warrior deck. The last time I hit Legend, it was with that Quest Hunter, and I didn't really like that Quest Hunter deck. But warrior is obviously my favorite class, right? And so I was like, I feel like I got to do it, and I hit into this niche with this one enraged warrior deck that was just super fucking fun. And I completed the climb. I guess I will say I did a lot of climbing with other decks. So I was playing another warrior deck for a while that was called Menagerie Warrior. Have I talked about Menagerie Warrior on the podcast?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there's warrior has not been doing great for a long time. It's been the recipient of numerous buffs, right? Now I would say it's probably in a pretty like good spot overall. But a good spot in a way that like is good for right now. It is number 8 in the meta. It used to be number 11, right? It used to be the worst deck in the meta. Now it is 8 out of 11, right? So not bad, not terrible kind of thing. But the actual warrior decks that you like, but there are tier 1 warrior decks, or I'm sorry, there are tier 2 warrior decks. Both Menagerie Warrior and Enraged Warrior are tier 2 decks. Control Warrior is a tier 3 deck, basically. The problem with Warrior for a while has been that a lot of its niche kind of got siphoned out by Death Knight, right? So Blood Death Knight in particular, really sort of just does what Control Warrior traditionally does, in the sense that it outlasts you, plays big minions, right? It kind of disrupts your game plan or whatever, and that's been a little bit of a frustrating thing to kind of like see, right? To see your favorite class lose all of its stuff and another class that is new and popular get that stuff and be like really better, right? One of the things about Death Knight right now that's so good is that it has no bad spells. Like all of its stuff is really useful. So discover effects, things that are creating value kind of from outside of your deck are really powerful. Warrior has a lot of bad stuff, right? For all of the for every good spell, right? That you would want to cast something like Shield Block, you have two bad spells. There's a spell called Clash of the Colossals. Clash of the Colossals is a card that adds a random big minion to your hand and your opponent's hand. You are literally giving your opponent value. I'm like, why would I ever fucking want to do this? This is a terrible idea. Um, there's other options that are like that, right? Like the value of the Discover pool is pretty low for Warrior right now. But the interesting thing is it has a couple of redundant things that make it better than other classes, one of which it has access to a lot of card draw. So you can actually make really powerful, consistent decks in kind of more consistent decks than most other decks in the format, right? Because they added a number of cards that are just draw two cards, draw a couple of cards. Maybe Druid only has a better card draw in sort of the format. And what I eventually realized was there was a mid-range Enrage Warrior package that's really compelling. Enrage Warrior is a warrior package that's about damaging your whole board of minions in order to activate special effects. One of the big ones is that there's an axe called Imbued Axe that says when your hero attacks, buff all of your minions by +1/+2, right? Or +2/+2 if it's powered up, kind of thing. And so the thing that you do is you play a Wild Pyromancer, you cast a spell, you have a big board. The Wild Pyromancer does 1 damage to everything, and then you attack with your axe, and everything puffs up by a bunch, right? And the question is, can you combine that with a consistent enough package to make threatening boards over time? And the answer is yeah, because Warrior has this weird token package that are present in spells. That allow you to do these kind of on these turn 5, turn 6 for just like insane tempo swings. And I just got really good at I don't know what it was, but I just connected with this deck in an insane way. My legendary run with Quest Hunter was 25 game winning streak, right? It was like 21 game winning streak. I was 25-3 when the winning streak really ended, and then I spent about 40 games in high diamond before I broke into legend with that deck, right? With the Enrage Warrior deck, I basically sailed all the way up to legend with 2 different versions of the deck in about 40 games. It took me 37 games in order to get from where's my like history? Is it replays? The fuck did Yeah, okay, we can chart this out. Okay, so we got all the way up to so I got to Diamond 10 with Menagerie Warrior. But I basically got all the way through Diamond from Diamond 8 to Legend with Enrage Warrior in that 37 games. Which means my win rate on that deck was pretty obscene. The first version of the deck had a 60% win rate. The second version of the deck had an 80% win rate. I think I probably went, I don't know, 28 or 29 and like 7 or something like that. Whatever those numbers kind of end up being. And that just, I don't know, feels good. Really proud of that, to be honest. As an achievement, I guess, which is sort of why I'm gushing about it a little bit. So yeah, this is a really weirdly good Hearthstone format. I didn't love this format in the beginning of the year, when it first kind of rolled around, but now that these buffs have kind of happened, nerfs to some problematic decks have happened. I think this format right now is a lot of fun. And now that I'm in Legend, I have just started fucking around with other decks that are stupid and fun because I find them stupid and fun. There's a Pirate Rogue deck that's really dumb. Pirate Rogue has this thing where they have a pirate called Captain Hooktusk. And if you play 8 pirates in the game and then play Captain Hooktusk, you can do a couple of things. You can steal cards out of your opponent's hand. You can steal cards out of your opponent's deck, actually. And playing a low to the ground pirate deck that has Hooktusk in it, and then a lot of discover effects that allow you to find more Hooktusks, is insanely stupid and fun. I have never had more fun playing like Hearthstone than just like this super stupid. That's not true. I've had way more fun playing Hearthstone, but I've had a lot of fun recently playing Hearthstone, playing this really stupid dumb deck because you just play like 2 or 3 hook tusks, um, excuse me, and keep yoinking their shit, which is just it's just satisfying. Um, yeah, and I don't know. That's it. That's my Hearthstone
Did
rant.
they
This is a good format. It's fun.
did they rebuff that card that you were talking about last week, like from the depths or whatever?
Yes, they rebuffed from they made 2 changes to Warrior that were good, but one was great, one was from the depths, which funnily enough was not good enough for me to run. I didn't run it in my Enraged Warrior package, but I'm probably going to start experimenting with a Control Warrior package. My guess is Control Warrior is still going to be like rank 3, like a tier 3 deck, but I think I'm going to be able to do cool things with it, and so we'll just sort of see. The Yeah, so yes, they did buff from the depths. It's now back to a 3 mana card, but it only reduces other mana cost by 2, which means that it just gives you like, but part of the problem with Warrior has been you don't have good stuff to do on turns like 2 and 3, right? One of the things that makes Enrage Warrior so good is the axe is so important, and the axe is a 3 mana card that a lot of your game plan is about getting the axe and playing the axe on, like doing a setup turn on like, okay, reason I call that a mid-range deck. Turns 1, 2, 3 are mostly about setup for turns 4, 5, 6 popping off, right? What you're looking to do, you're not looking to hit the board. When I'm playing the Menagerie deck, the Menagerie deck is about seizing initiative on the board and then just kind of running that deep until you play your big finishers, which are these 1 amalgam bands, right? And you have this sort of side game of trying to find and copy as many 1 amalgam bands as possible, because that's the biggest, most powerful card you're going to get, right? This is the card that gets all of the archetypes, right? Gets stealth, wind fury, lifesteal, poison, like all of that shit, right? That is an aggressive deck because you are looking to steal the board from turn 1 and hold it into your kind of game-winning turns, which are going to be 5, 6, 7, when you're going to be able to drop your kind of top end and close out by playing powerful one amalgam bands. The Enraged deck is not about that. The Enraged deck wants you to set up on turns 1, 2, and 3, right? You want to play minions that your opponent doesn't want to attack. There's an egg called Foul Egg, which is just a 1 mana 0/2, but when it dies, it spawns 0/3, right? It's really good for the Enrage package because you're dealing damage to your own shit. So the egg itself can be damaged and then buffed by the axe, for instance, but it can also just be destroyed, right? But really what it's there for is you play it on turn 1 and your opponent doesn't want to spawn a 3/3 for you, so they just leave it there for 4 turns, right? And then when you do want to do your big swing turn, your big tempo turn, right, where you're going to buff everything with the axe, that's like to turn 4, turn 5. The egg is probably still just sitting there, ready to do that, right? And the other thing that you're doing is you're playing stuff like Instrument Tech, which draws a weapon out of your deck. So Instrument Tech is just a 2 mana card, draws your weapon, and you play the weapon on 3. That's like a perfect curve for this deck. You play Foul Egg, you play Instrument Tech, you play the weapon, and then on turn 4, turn 5, that's when you're looking to really like go hard. You're going to pop off. You're going to drop a Wild Pyromancer. You're going to drop a Bridge Riff and spawn 2 tokens. You're going to damage everything on the board. You're going to start swinging with the weapon, and you're going to be making these huge boards kind of over and over again until you get to win, kind of thing. And so my expectation is that in another version of the deck that is less about the Enrage package and is probably more about big stuff package, the From the Depths is going to help a lot, because From the Depths, by reducing the mana cost, it allows you to run a higher top end without getting punished so hard for it. And so in a version of that deck, being able to spend, maybe turn 1 you'll Instrument Tech, maybe turn 3 you'll From the Depths and pull a big card, and you'll be able to tempo that card a little bit faster, right? You're playing a 6 mana card on turn 4, that kind of a thing. That's kind of the hope, but we'll see. I haven't toyed around with that deck. I wanna do some proper experimentation. That's probably where I'm gonna go. Fuck around next, that kind of thing. So yeah,
Very cool. On my end, I have been playing a bunch of Marvel Snap as well. Speaking of card games, and something that interesting that happened was for their seasonal pass. One of their quests was like play a deck with Star-Lord in it, which was a thing I'm not super happy about, just from like a kind of like design point of view, because like I don't think there's been like a season that's like or like a seasonal quest that's been like play the specific cards. There's been a lot of kind of like play certain things around it, but I was originally going to slot Star-Lord into like one of my existing decks, just kind of like a, you know, I could maybe sacrifice a card that didn't do much. But I was like, no, let me actually play around the Guardians. So the way that Guardians work in Marvel Snap is their on reveal effects are that if someone has played a card opposite that card at that location, you get a buff, right? Like so, like Rocket Raccoon is a 1/2, gets +2 power if on reveal somebody's played a card there this turn. Star Lord is 2/2 +3, and there's a bunch of them, right? And I had kind of abandoned them early on because it's like, oh, it's kind of like not guaranteed value, right? Like, you know, and there are other cards in those kinds of slots that like have guaranteed effects. Like, I don't really want to play these, but since I had to play it, I thought like, well, what do I do to make sure that I'm getting value out of these cards? And there are like location control cards that can kind of do this for you, right? The big ones for me right now are Storm, which is a 3/2 that says there's one more turn left and then you can't play cards at this location anymore. Does a pretty good forcing job at like, you know, somebody's probably going to play a card there on the turn that they have left, so you can play a Guardian there to like get their boost off. Then there's Professor X, which is a 5-drop, and he's expensive. He's 5/3, but he totally locks down a location, which doesn't do anything directly, but it limits where in the future cards can be played, right? So you know that like if you play a card or that if you play Professor X, that like you've got a 50-50 shot instead of a 1/3 shot if somebody plays a card. And then there's Spider-Man, which similarly he's a 4/3 that like locks out the area for your opponent next turn, which, you know, I have won a handful of games off of, you know, Spider-Man into Professor X to lock down a location. That means I win that location, and then like, you know, either a Gamora or I'll have something else on the board. And like my 6-drop is Odin, which reactivates on reveals, which is great because it's like towards the end of the game, it's usually pretty clear where the fight's gonna be. That or like people are playing like a spread with like a bunch of things. So like you drop Odin on a place with Guardians, and like the Guardians reactivate their thing, and if somebody's played a card there, you get a bunch of free power. And so that's been super compelling for me, right? Like I have it is not my like I go back and forth between that and my classic favorite hate deck, which is a deck built around Kingpin. Kingpin is a 3/4 that on turn 6, anything that moves here gets destroyed, and then I have a bunch of like move your opponent's cards effects. That deck
really sounds like a U deck.
Yeah, it is a harder deck to pull off just because, you know, you need to simultaneously have people like not play cards opposite Kingpin. That way there are slots to move things to, and have like a setup to pull things to that location. Unfortunately, like I often end up winning off the other aspects of the deck just because, like, you know, the Kingpin part tends to be a little bit to win more, right? Like, you know, like the capstone for that deck is Magneto 6/12, move all 3 or 4 cost cards to this location, opposing 3 or 4 cost cards to this location. That'll kill a bunch of stuff, but like, you know, there's not always space for it. There's not always a thing that pulls it, and also pulling a thing does not guarantee that, like, you know, that like more often than not, I would have won the position anyway, and the place I'm pulling from doesn't necessarily benefit from having stuff pulled from it. So, you know, there's a lot of jiggery pokery there too. Anyway, that's like, you know, still fun to play around with. It's the rest of the deck that isn't like built around that stuff is me just being an asshole to the other player, right? Like things that are increasing costs or causing other people to like have to like move around me, which is fun, but like it does not as much success as the Guardians deck, and the Guardians deck is fun to me because there's still like that interactive element, and it's still like screwing with other people a bunch. Whereas like, you know, the other decks I like to play sometimes are like there's a couple of decks that I run that are based around destruction effect, destroying your own creatures, and those creatures either give you benefits or like the cards that are destroying the creatures have benefits. And so those are fun, but they can be kind of like solitaire so I don't like them quite as much, but it's still that's kind of like what I do in between things, right? Like that's my kind of you know, downtime.
You know, it's funny, the concept of a win more card really frustrated me when I like learned of it, right? And I get there's no mulligan in
No.
Marvel Snap. You just get what you get, right? That's
Yeah.
interesting. One of the things I learned with the Enrage Warrior deck, because I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to a podcast called the Vicious Syndicate podcast, which is like really high level players talking about really high level Hearthstone. And one of the things that they were talking about, people will make fun of this. They'll say draw better is a good way to win more games, right? Oh, my opponent just drew better, right? What just happened? I've been blown out. There are some decks that are, we call them scam decks because they're basically just looking for a high roll, right? And they scam games if they get their high roll. I've been on the other side of that. I've been on the side of that before, right? But a recommendation that they gave in that podcast that I thought was really interesting was they were just like, mulligan more aggressively. Something that bad players do is they settle for less, right?
Right.
They say, "Oh, I see a turn 1, I see a turn 2, I see a turn 3," right? I'm okay, right, with this hand or whatever. And it's like, no. You should not be keeping these cards, right? You should mulligan hard for your best cards, right? And that's something I learned about the Enraged Warrior deck. I was like, you know what? The axe is my most important tool, right? I need the axe in order to set up these boards. I'm gonna mulligan hard for the axe. I'm gonna mulligan hard for Thor Balore, just a powerful legendary. I'm gonna mulligan hard for Bridge Riff, right? The big token creator. I'm gonna mulligan hard for Anima Extractor, right? Every time a minion of yours receives damage, it buffs a card in your hand by +1/+1. And it's like, some of those games are, in a certain sense, scam games, right? Because I'm able to drop an axe on turn 3. On turn 4, I can do, just powerful things, dropping an Anima Extractor, a token thing, something that'll skipper the whole board, right? Pyromancer the whole board, buff stuff in my hand by +5/+5, right? And like that stuff is only possible because I'm drawing my most powerful cards and I'm mulliganing aggressively for my most powerful cards. And I think that there's a real tension but so interesting about that though. I was reading the guy who showed me this list on Reddit, right? People were like, Anima Extractor seems like a really powerful card. Is it like a combo piece and I hold it until I can use it? Or do I play it on turn 2 on an empty board? And his response was, spend your mana, which I thought was very clever, right? It's just like, you know what? Don't sit there and wait for these perfect plays, right? Just spend your mana, right? Put pressure on the board. Who cares? If it gets removed, if it gets killed, that sucks, sure, but whatever. You force the you had initiative. You forced the piece of removal out of your opponent. They did not develop tempo that turn. That's good for you, kind of thing. And I feel like that's a tough thing for any of these kind of card games, right? We look at the perfect scenario, right, where Kingpin, I guess, like Kingpin Magneto goes off and you just like blow your opponent out. But most of the times you're playing towards win +1, right?
Yeah.
Dealing enough damage to your opponent that you win the game and no further, because you don't need any excess damage. Doesn't fucking matter. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's my, like, when I'm thinking about like win more stuff or whatever, that's like the hard thing to I don't know, get across.
Yeah. And Marvel Step also works a little bit strange, right? Because like you can get some like weird like turn 6 swings just because like that's, I feel like that's part of how the game's designed. But to your point, like there's no mulligan in Marvel Snap, but I think the mulligan is supposed to be retreating, right? Like if your opponent snaps on you and you don't think you can beat it, retreat, right? Like take the L and only lose 1 point and like come back and win a game where you can win, right? Like and also like the flip side of that is also knowing when to like hit the snap button, right? Like knowing when to like take your wins when you can get them, even if your opponent retreats in the face of it and you only get a point. Like it's better to lock that in than to leave it up to chance, right? Like I am not the best Marvel Snap player. The number of times I have lost because I forgot that Doom is a card, right, is too many. Doom is a 6/5 that like spawns Doom bots at the other 2 locations. Doom bots are also 6/5s, but like the 6 doesn't matter because they're free. And like that gets around a lot of stuff, right? Like that doesn't get around the lockdown from Professor X, but it does get around the Storm lockdown because the Storm just doesn't let you play a card there, right? If there are ways to move around it. But like that's it's that's why I find it so compelling, because it's about like kind of like reads, right? Like it's about like knowing how to like make force things to work. Like the best I feel is like a turn 6, like I've had several times for like turn 6, no one can do anything because like I've locked down 2 of the locations, and the third location was like a location that locks itself down at some point. Um, and I've won, right? And I'm sitting there, and I just hit the snap button because I know my opponent's going to retreat because he can't do anything. But I hit the snap button just to kind of like rub it in a little bit, and then he retreats, right? Like, because then
I
like
kind of wish I had a snap button because there is stuff like that. Yeah, I agree with you. Reads are the most fun about all of this, right? Like part of what made the Enrage Warrior deck so fun is that I had really good reads on opponents sometimes. For instance, there was one game. I'm just intensely proud of this. So Blood Death Knight is the big control deck in the meta. There's 2. There's Blood Control Priest and Blood Death Knight, right? These are the big control decks in the meta that are generally win conditionless cards, right? But or decks, and they're just looking to kind of exhaust you of resources, clear all of your shit over and over and over again, right? So Blood Death Knight has medium level removal and high level removal. Their high level removal might be something like Soul Stealer, which is an 8 mana 5/5, comes into play, destroys everything on the board, right? But their medium level removal is very built on damage, right? So they have one, which is Corpse Explosion, which deals 1 damage and spends 1 corpse until everything on the board is dead. So it just like is a big AoE that's 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage. And then the other one is Blood Boil, which puts essentially a dot on all of your creatures that says at the end of your turn, this takes 2 damage and you gain 2 life, right? It's like 2 damage with life steal and it procs at the end of the turn. And I got so good at these fucking reads against Blood Death Knights where I would drop an Anima Extractor on turn 5 on a powerful board, right? And so what they would do is they would sit there and I'm like, you want to clear this board. You want to Corpse Explode, right? But if you fucking Corpse Explode, my Anima Extractor is going to get, not even joking, 60 ticks. Right? You know, like I have a board of 5 things, right? Each one of those is going to take 1 damage 6 times before the Anima Extractor expires or whatever. You are going to buff my hand to fucking oblivion, right? And it's just so satisfying to do that because they do that, and then I play, Remornia. Remornia is a minion. This is like, it's actually Siren Athreus' sword, right? Remornia is a minion. When you attack with it, it becomes a weapon with that stats, and then when you attack with the weapon, it becomes a minion again. And so a big win condition for this deck sometimes is you make a 20 power Remornia, play it, it attacks something, and then you attack their face with a 20 power weapon, right? And just like making those reads, it feels so good. Though there are also times where, there are times when you play stuff and you're like, if they have X, I lose. And then they have X and you're like, okay. Like I rolled the dice and I got snake eyes. That's fair enough.
That is actually part of what I like about Marvel Snap. They're like, friend of the cast, Zhao, posted like a short video about like, making people feel good about like, when you hit retreat, you escape rather than lose, right? Like, and it makes you feel like you got a little win. And like I'll throw down a Professor X and I'll be like, I'm banking on them not playing anything here this turn because it's not like a high value card in itself. I'm just gonna lock down this location, and like that'll be like part of my win con. And they'll play something opposite, and now I'm locked out of it too, and I can't win that. And the board sucks. It's like, okay, well, I'm out. Retreat, right? Like, and that sometimes that sucks, but like that's part of what I like about Snap, right? Like, the games are short, right? Like they're like 3 to 4 minutes a piece. And like, you get a minor win by not losing is hard, right? Like, so I really enjoy that. So that's that's been a lot of what I've been doing. I don't have a lot of other media, I don't think, to talk about, just because I went to the New Hampshire Renaissance Fair this weekend, which is not a huge one, but it was fun. Saw a bunch.
That's good. We went to the Renaissance Fair. Wait, did I tell you about this?
Yeah, you did.
Renaissance Fair 2 weeks ago.
I don't know if you talked about it in the sense that you were playing Zoetti at it.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I brought the Switch, and I didn't actually play Zoetti for all that much, but like we were like waiting, for like lunch or whatever. Honestly, we were pretty depressed by the Ren Fair in LA recently, just because it's big and it's huge, which is nice. But I guess I'm just a little less interested in the like crafts and stuff. I don't know. Rachel told me a pretty depressing story about how like half of the rings that they were looking at were like rings that you could buy in China for $1, you know, and that like you could just get shipped to your house. It was like looking at the same shit and paying $60 for that because someone's playing it off like, oh, I'm some, you know, medieval artisan. It was like, no, that's fucking like, I'm all for the RP, but I'm not going to RP $59 of profit for you.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like there were there were a handful of like the New Hampshire one isn't super huge. It's in like a farm. It's like on like a farm field somewhere. Um, but there were a handful of tents that all had like the the like the bone drinking horns, which are clearly like some sort of molded plastic, and they look sim like, and I couldn't find it on AliExpress, but it's like they're definitely mass ordering this and like selling it at a markup, right? Like, so maybe I'll go look for it. But there were also like, you know, things that were clearly handmade, right? Like my girlfriend bought a flower circlet that was clearly made by somebody, right? Like, um, and like I think the smaller Ren fairs tend to get a little bit more of that just because, like, you know, no, like the big players aren't going to the small Ren fairs, right? Like it's, you know, it's the fun. And there's also like there was like jousting, there was like a magic show, there was somebody playing a lyre, right? There was, oh my gosh, I don't like to hate on furries. There was this dude, and I don't even know if I should call him a furry because he wasn't in like a fursuit. He was in like a skin tight tiger suit. It was like an older dude, right? Like he looked like if you like brought like Hobbes from Calvin and Hobbes to life, and like with like orange face paint, and like thankfully he was clearly wearing undergarments of some sort because you would have been able to tell if he wasn't, right? But like it's just like, holy shit, what are you doing here, right? Like you are not medieval. You're just like a tiger man that looks like that's dressed way too revealingly in this like skin suit, right? Like, but you know, I guess it's the type of people you get at Ren fairs, right? Is weirdos, which is, you know, my type of people. There was like this couple that was like, dude, like 3D printed his own minis and like was selling like a DM beginner box, and like, you know, it was like, this is really cute, right? Like I could see myself, you know, a future version of me doing this on weekends is like setting up a booth at a Run fair and selling my custom D&D minis, right? Like that's super fun.
Yeah. Oh, that is something that did happen. So I told you about Tailspire, right?
Yes, yeah. How did that
you were
go?
like you were the Kickstarter. It was very cool. We just did some sort of like low level normal RP. I'm very proud of it though. You know, because the idea is we're playing it during the time of Warcraft 3, where you know, one of the things that happens is Arthas comes back from Northrend with Frostmourne. He kills his father in Capital City. Plunges the whole city into chaos, right? He's now a Death Knight, and he unleashes this scourge upon Lordaeron, and the whole thing collapses, right? And so what we're doing is we're playing this tank crew, this dwarven tank crew. We are in Quel'Thalas, right, which is the home of the High Elves, later Blood Elves. And the idea is, you know, we are going to be on this like journey home where we have to scavenge and survive as the undead have just collapsed the military structure and society all around us. But obviously this is before all of that. But the thing that I'm really excited for is when the game first started, Rachel was like, okay, like what are you guys doing? And I immediately asked the question. I was like, okay, well, there's me and then there's Warren, who are playing the two dwarves, right? I'm playing Masnar Cliffgrove, who's the gunner. Warren is playing Shroom, who is the tank commander, right? But there's going to be a driver, there's going to be an engineer on our tank crew, right? We know that Mard and Lou, our other friends, Mard playing a high elf spellbreaker, Lou playing a human priest, are going to end up being the engineer and driver in the tank crew as like things turn to shit or whatever. But for now we have two NPCs, and I was like, I'm just gonna like build some fucking pathos. So I was like, what are the two other tank crew member names? And Rachel was like, okay, one is this, one is that. And I think the girl's name was like like Friedrich or whatever, but she was a girl, and I was like, oh my god, I have the perfect thing. And so I just immediately started doing this RP where Maznar, I have tanked charisma on Maznar, in very against type for me, not playing a charisma, like a character who has enough charisma in order to be like a leader of the team or whatever. And Maznar is hopelessly in love with her, right? But is too shy and awkward to actually kind of make anything happen. But you know that she's going to, like, she has to die, right? Or something, because the tank crew is going to have to be this other thing. And so excuse me. And so I'm just very proud of that. Like it's just fun doing like little things that help move the story forward and give I think of this stuff as kind of like covering yourself in Velcro, and you can just stick to anything,
Yeah,
right? Like covering yourself into story glue, right?
giving the GM hooks to exploit, right? Like if they want to.
Exactly, right.
Very cool. Yeah, that's super cool. I
wrote a bunch of tank mechanics. We can talk about it. We're out of time now, but I wrote a bunch of tank mechanics I'm pretty excited about. I think I found a good kind of track with them. We'll see. I'll keep you all upgraded.
It's been a while since we've done a D&D episode. That might be a fun thing to do, is like go over them, right? Like, and I can offer my scathing critiques and or effusive praise, depending.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, but you're right. We are out of time, so we'll save that for another time. I'm going to set our if you want to email us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, email us derpsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsplaygames.com. You'll follow us at twitch.tv/derpsplaygames or youtube.com/@derpsplaygames, where these go live. Rate, review us on podcast places. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I know. No. Yeah, I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
All right. Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.